Over 100,000 Americans died last year from overdoses, and many had no idea they were taking counterfeit pills laced with deadly fentanyl. I'm U.S. Attorney Michael Easley, here to remind you that it only takes one pill to kill. International drug cartels are bringing deadly drugs to our communities and disguising them as legitimate prescription pills. Whether they're sold on a street corner or through a smartphone, we are prosecuting the drug traffickers. But we also have to raise awareness. Our Heroin Education Action Team is partnering with local schools and community groups to spread the word. If you or a loved one has been affected by the opioid crisis, please call the Substance Abuse Hotline. Your community is here for you.
No one ever sets out to be addicted to drugs. Like, no one ever wakes up one morning and is like, oh, I want to be a drug addict someday. Like, no one does that, right? It's always starts as like this innocent curiosity, or at least for me it did. And then slowly but surely it takes over your life. And looking back, I didn't even realize what was happening. You know, like it was all fun and games. It was all hanging out with friends. It was all experimenting with new stuff. And then by the time I realized that it was more than that, in some ways it was too late. Growing up, for the most part, like I had everything you could have ever asked for. Both my parents at home, and I never really wanted for anything. As I grew up, I stopped caring so much about what my family thought, and I started caring about what all my friends thought. I wanted my friends to like me. I wanted my friends to think I was popular, and I also happened to be around a not great crew of friends in some ways. That's how it works. It's not the guy in the dark alleyway trying to get you to, do this thing. It's your friends. It's people who you love and care about who think that everyone's just having a good time. We, started smoking cigarettes behind the school, and it was no big deal. It was just for fun. That progressed into weed, and the first time I smoked weed, I became obsessed with the way that drugs made me feel. And that kind of set me on this journey of trying all these different substances and experimenting with all these different things. To me, it was like just for fun. It was no big deal. It was something I did with my friends and a way to have a good time. I'd been told a million times, like, oh, if you do drugs, your life is gonna be over. You're gonna be addicted to drugs in, a week. And for me, I'm looking at my friends, I'm looking at the people around me who experimented, and they were fine, right? Like their lives weren't falling apart. They weren't homeless. Like this narrative that I'd been told, to me, it seemed like it wasn't true. So I'm looking at, the adults in my life who are like, this is gonna ruin your life. And then I'm looking at the kids in my life and it seems like they're just having a good time. So I'm like, okay, someone's not telling the truth here. And I thought I knew who it was. So I kept going down that path, and the first time I tried opiates, I knew that that's how I wanted to feel all the time. So it stopped being this fun thing I did on the weekends. And at that point, opiates really started to take over my life. Eventually the pills became heroin, and said, okay, I'll do heroin, but I will never use a needle. Whenever you're around something a lot, it stops being such a big deal. Like when I was in high school, even though I was using drugs, the idea of a needle was so far off, was that's crazy. Only crazy people do that. But then whenever your whole friend group's doing it, it's it's not that big a deal. And you get desensitized to it. So I got desensitized to it, started using needles. I think a couple things changed. It went from being this party thing that you would do around people that was no big deal to being this thing that you were almost maybe a little shameful of, that you wouldn't do in front of most people. It was no longer fun and games. I stopped being the happy-go-lucky guy that, had all these friends. And the biggest priority in my life that I had to take care of before I took care of anything else was heroin. It was just survival mode. I was just trying to not be sick. I was trying to function throughout the day. It stopped being fun a long time before that. It wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't a party thing anymore. It was survival. It was, this is what you have to do to accomplish basic functions. My body needed heroin, wanted heroin more than it wanted food or water. It wanted that more than I wanted anything else in the world. At that point, my life spiraled out of control. I was in and out of jail. I was in and out of rehabs and struggled so hard to stop.
Addiction can lead to you being out of control to the point where you're doing things that you never thought you would do, trying to chase that feeling that you used to have.
Probably one of the lowest points in my stories. I remember my friend overdosing in front of me, and instead of me helping him or calling the ambulance, I rifled through his pockets and I took his heroin and his money and I left him where he was. And I think about that moment and it just like, how far had I gotten from who I was? Like I'd been this people person who loved people and cared about people, and all of a sudden I was willing to do anything for this drug.
Addiction is needing a substance more and more and more without being able to control the need for that substance. Dopamine is the chemical that tells us what to repeat to sustain life. So when we eat, we get hits of dopamine because we need to sustain life. When we hydrate, when we drink, we get hits of dopamine. When drugs come in, they give us hits of dopamine that are so high, our brains were not meant to handle that level of dopamine. Now, drugs take the #1 spot to survival because dopamine said so. Eating becomes #2, hydrating becomes #3, and so on. Your brain is saying anytime that there's something wrong, anytime you feel stressed, anytime that you're not comfortable, get that drug because that's going to help you sustain life. So your brain is learning that connection to the drug, that when I feel bad, I can just take this pill or I can just take this substance and I'll feel good. So the next time you feel stressed and something happens, you're going to want to feel good again. And at first it's a choice, but after you continually do it again and again and again, it can turn into an addiction. And then that takes your choice away.
You know, my body needed heroin, wanted heroin more than it wanted food or water. It wanted that more than I wanted anything else in the world.
The prefrontal cortex is our executive center. That's where we think. We weigh options, we weigh consequences. If we do this, then this will happen. When we're in active addiction, that part of the brain gets hijacked. We are led by the limbic system where our fight or flight is. In a normal functioning brain, it's top down. Thinking is going to take dominion over the whole brain. In a brain with addiction, it's bottom up. So we are functioning from our fight or flight and survival. And I will do what I have to do to get those drugs.
To people on the outside, it looks like you're just making this choice again and again and again, and it's ruining your life, and why don't you just stop? And to you on the inside, it feels like you can't stop. There's nothing that you can do to stop. You've tried, and your body feels like it needs it, and if you don't, what's gonna happen?
You get physiological effects, like you cannot stop thinking about this drug. You will do whatever you have to do to get this drug.
I was breaking into houses, I was robbing people, I was selling drugs to keep my addiction afloat. My entire life became those two things. It was committing crimes and doing drugs. Whenever I didn't have the drugs that I needed, I felt horrible. Like I wish I could describe how, like it was like the flu, but a million times worse. Like my body hurt, I had aches, my legs were restless. Like it was one of the worst feelings in the world.
Addiction is progressive. It will continue to grow and grow and grow. You may start out using 1 pill, and 1 pill will be okay for a little while. Then you need 2 pills to get the same effect that 1 pill gave you. Eventually, you will need 3 pills, 4 pills, 5 pills.
This is the baseline, and drugs take you up here. Drugs take you up here. Eventually, it takes you to the point where you're down here without drugs. And whenever you use, you kind of just get back to this baseline where you feel okay for a little bit, and then you drop back down.
And your body may not be able to take the amount of pills that you feel you need to feel good, and it could lead to death.
Don't just ignore all the negative things that you hear about addiction. Like people aren't trying to trick you. People aren't trying to hide this great thing from you that they just don't want you to experience. Like there's a reason why people struggle with addiction. There's a reason why substances have wreaked such havoc on the world around us. And it's not because everyone's lying about where it can take you. And I know that it feels like you will be the exception to the rule, but there's a reason why it's a rule. We always think like, oh, but that's not gonna be me. Like, yes, that person overdosed. Yes, that person failed out of school. Yes, that person's life is ruined, but like, that's not gonna be me. I can just do it this once and it's no big deal. And that story just, it seems like it is never true, because what happens is you do it just once and it's no big deal. And then the story is, well, I did it that one time and everything is fine. Surely I can do it again and everything will be fine. And therein starts your rationalization. I did it 2 times and I was fine, so I can do it this weekend and be fine. And before you know it, you've rationalized yourself all the way to using drugs every day. So to think that you would be the one that would be okay, you would be the one who would make it out, you would be the one who would be able to do drugs successfully. We want to believe that about ourselves, but very rarely is that story true.
I think a large part of substance abuse starts with poor mental health. That could pull you to start experimenting with things that calm your nerves. It's a huge escape for teenagers to not have to think about their school and their parents and the things that are going on in their life. My brother David would be 24 today, and he was a really good kid. When he was younger, he struggled a lot with social image. He didn't really fit in with anybody else. And as he got older, his mental health began to worsen, and he fought with a lot of anxiety and depression. And so he began to illustrate that he wanted to take his own life. He found oxycodone, and he took 90 pills of oxycodone. When David passed away, my mom created JoCo Angels as an opioid awareness group. And we do a lot to educate young people. A large part of JoCo Angels' presentation actually speaks on fentanyl and how it's hidden in everything. The smallest amount of fentanyl could drop an elephant, let alone a high school teenager.
Fentanyl is a synthetic drug, and it is the single most deadly drug our nation has ever encountered. It is 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, and you could die by taking fentanyl one time.
A lot of drug dealers mix it into their drugs because they want their buyers to have a better high and become addicted to the drugs. And so if they're addicted to something, they're gonna come back and buy more.
It's profitable to put fentanyl in because the effects are great and it's cheap to do it. The drug dealers may not mean to set out to kill people. If they do, they do. It's the cost of business. They don't care about your life. They care about profits and making money.
When you're buying anything from anyone, or even if your friend is handing it to you, you have no clue what's in it.
They're selling them online now, and they package it to look like Ativan. They'll package it to look like the Xanaxes. Do not buy pills online, no matter how pretty or attractive they look. They likely have fentanyl in them, and it could kill you with one try.
The first time you try drugs could be the very last time because no matter what, it could kill you.
The vast majority of people that I used drugs with didn't make it out. And all of those people, were good people. They had families and people that loved them, and they never wanted to die. They weren't bad people, but unfortunately that's where their addiction took them. So you can measure the extent of addiction not by the damage done to someone's life, but by the damage done to the lives of those around them. So you can see how bad an addiction is by the amount that people are hurt that are a part of that person's life, whether they're friends or family or spouses or children. That's where the most havoc is wreaked by addiction.
Addiction. You have robbed me of the time with my son. You've taken control of my son's head and monopolized his time and attention. You've taken countless hours, which would have been spent on the boat and teaching my son about boating and waterways. You've kept time with my son to a bare minimum. Addiction, you have angered me because all of the life you have sucked from my son. If you would only take on human form, I would fight you until death. Yours or mine. Signed, Josh's dad. Everybody that I heard from talked about what an amazing guy he was, that he would give you the shirt off his back, that he was just a nice guy. And when he wasn't on drugs, he was. One of the saddest things for me is the lies that Josh would tell. Addicts, I have discovered, are amazing liars. The ability to lie was solely based on his need to get heroin. He would say that bad guys were after him, that he had to pay them money, just trying to figure out a way to get money from me. At one point in time, he attacked me. He said, "Give me the money or you'll be sorry." He was definitely high. He didn't know what he was doing. Josh did come to me and talk about how he was going to get better, that he wanted to get better, but he didn't know how to get out of it. He would get out of rehab and return to his normal life with the same friends. And it's hard to go back to that same crowd and expect something to happen different. Josh checked himself out of treatment. I picked him up and we headed out to lunch at a restaurant on the water. And we talked about a rehab facility in Florida that he wanted to go to. So he was excited about that. We made a trip to the mall. Unbeknownst to me, Josh made it into the restroom at the food court and bought drugs. We went back to the house. We had Buffalo Wild Wings for dinner. We watched some TV. He got up about 11:15 off the couch and said, "I'm going to bed." I stood up and hugged him. He said, "I love you, Dad. Thanks for everything you've done." And that was the last thing that I ever heard from Josh. The next morning, he didn't get up and his door was locked. I ended up breaking into his room and I found him overdosed. This letter is the last letter that Josh wrote me. He wrote this probably 4 or 5 days before he passed away. "Dear Dad, words cannot begin to describe how terribly sorry I am for putting you through all of this again. The lies and the hurt I put you through hurts me more than you think. I promise I'm going to come out of here a different person, one that you can love and be proud of again. I know we have been through some hard times together, and I truly appreciate you always being there for me, no matter how bad a situation I was in. All of those things I talked to you about, I want to do with you. I want to take the boat out and go fishing, take the dogs to the beach, or just be able to call you and say, hey, let's get some dinner. Please don't hate this town because of me. You can always create new memories here with Becky, and with me, I hope. But I just want you to know how truly sorry I am for everything that I've done once again, and that I love you to the end of the world and back. And I promise you, it will be nothing but good memories from here on out. Love, your one and only son, Josh." If I were to see Josh, I would say, that I miss him, that I love him, that I think about him every single day, and that I'll see him soon.
I knew that my life had gotten somewhere where I didn't want it to be, but I had no idea how to stop. And eventually, through all these rehabs and all these mistakes and all these struggles, I began to ask people for help. I began to open up, began to reach out. I met a community of people that loved me and encouraged me and pointed me in the right direction. I would not be alive if it wasn't for those people who I was willing to ask for help from and who were willing to help me.
Don't ever feel ashamed about needing help. Addiction is very isolating, and isolation and boredom are really, really big triggers to do what? To continue to use. And that won't be good. Please talk to someone you trust.
I do think it's worth surrounding people who are going to better you, who are going to push you in the right direction, who are going to encourage you, and not just people who are gonna, drag you down. By all means, be around people who struggle, but make sure that you're also around people who are pushing you in the right direction, and make sure that you're the one influencing the people who are struggling and not just them influencing you. Sometimes it doesn't seem like finding some good friends is gonna be the thing that really helps you or really changes your life, but sometimes that's exactly what we need. So now I've been sober since January 15th, 2012, and my life is completely different because of it. The thing that changed me was loving me. It was encouraging me. It was saying, hey, we care about you. We think you're a great person. That's why we want to help you. The life that I have now, I would never trade to go back to addiction. And I think that's a really important thing to find. And I think you can find it through a positive community and through exploring your dreams and your desires and what you want to do with your life.
If you're feeling like you cannot talk to an adult, Go online and look at some of the resources that are there for you.